Hello, I am Ali Hassan, and I'm going to give you my engine evaluation and prototype plan for VR bar games. So, the premise of this is going to be a multiplayer VR game where you can play games in a beer garden like Jenga, Horseshoes, and Darts. But the premise of this game is essentially we're going to have a multiplayer game with virtual reality, which means players are going to have the freedom of movement to go anywhere they want, and have movable and grabbable objects for them to interact with. And since they're going to be playing games like Jenga and Horseshoes, they're going to need to figure out the physics of throwing a falling object. We're going to have some collision detection to track points and track when the Jenga tower needs to fall, and also when the horseshoes hit the pole. And since it's going to be placed in a beer garden, we're going to have it be mostly scenic, but still functional. So since it's a VR game, the engine we're going to use is basically locked into Unity or Unreal. They're both really easy to implement VR and multiplayer in. They have blueprints, they have scripts, they have sending data between multiple agents. It's relatively simple in both, and they both have decent graphics and physics. So it really comes down to what we really want out of the game. What are the real goals that we want out of our engine? Well, we're going to care a lot about graphics. Walking around should be immersive. Players should have the free range to do whatever they want, which means that we're going to have good, realistic, immersive graphics. Along with that, we're going to have decent physics, good enough physics to make the Jenga tower fall. We're going to need horseshoes and darts to fly and hit objects. So the physics also has to be somewhat realistic and still robust where it needs to be. Also, this is a multiplayer game. The engine needs to be able to handle a lot of people connecting to a network. We could probably achieve that with a fast processing coding language and a fast render pipeline so everyone can be in the same space at the same time and everything can load in very quickly. Well, all these reasons are why I'm choosing Unreal out of the two. Unreal works well in a 3D space. It has a built-in networking and VR support, very easy to test as well. A very high fidelity graphics and baked lighting with nanite visual geometry. We have a Niagara particle effects, which means that we could definitely make the physical Jenga tower fall using particle effects and physics-based particles. Uh, Also, it runs on C++. It runs very quickly, comparatively to C Sharp, really. It can also handle multiple players and particles better, as it's basically built for AAA proprietary engines. What are the risks of this? So, the main risk is going to be the fact that this is multiplayer. The game is basically just a physics simulator, a sandbox game where you just put things down and then people start working on them however they will. So the risks are going to be mostly based off of multiplayer and how that's going to work within this. Server-side and client-side game optimization is going to be the most important part of this endeavor. As more people play, there are going to be more data sent back and forth to the UI, like how many people are going to be working on things at the same time. Ensuring safe connection is going to be very important as well, and stopping the game from crashing when a reasonable amount of people join. We don't want the game to crash when there's 10 people joining. That would be a little absurd for a game. Plus, the game should be able to handle players when they all come at the same time, if they all happen to fall out of the world or abuse their movement to somehow go through what we've set out for them. We should be able to account for that as well, especially if a lot of people clutter the place at the same time due to, in case a lot of people join at the same time. So, what do we need to do to prototype this? Well, the main thing we're going to have to prototype is making sure that the games we're going to put in work. So, chaos destruction is something that's been added to Unreal that basically allows objects to break and fall apart based off of some gradient that we apply to it. This would essentially be throwing a horseshoe at a Jenga tower, which means we do two things at the same time of doing the throwing for the horseshoe and then seeing the Jenga tower fall when it's not stable enough. This is meant to test how the physics should work, as both physics-based particles and throwing objects in VR are going to work with interacting with objects, which is going to be a given for a lot of these prototypes. And that's a inbuilt and, well, part of the engine that we're going to be using. It's a VR game. What else do we need to do with it? And the other one is going to be the network prototyping. This is less important, but still somewhat important to understand and get working. We need to ensure that player-to-player connection works, along with the UI updating and agents being able to see changes within the game world. Also, inviting people being able to log off safely, setting up lobbies, setting up servers, setting up all the things that need to be done within the system, especially with VR. While this could be easily tested within the engine because it has an inbuilt multiplayer testing, um, server and client connection updating should be happening in real time, and we should at least prototype for it, just so we know exactly what we're going to do with both the physics, the walking, and the network, which essentially means we can have the entire game done once we have all these prototypes made. And that's essentially it. Uh, Very simple game idea, has a lot of things that we could add to it, and given the amount of time and effort we put into it, it could be a very good, very robust game that runs very smoothly, can have a lot of people on it, and look very professional at the same time. So thank you for following my presentation.